Today we're going to carve a live edge walnut slab as a tribute to a good friend of ours. So our buddy Patrick brought a bunch of walnut slabs and he asked if we could make a sign for a friend of mine named Bob. And this dude is an awesome guy. He is a very strong Christian and he actually influenced me to start reading my Bible on a daily basis. Before work every day, his father-in-law would get up early, come down to the kitchen table and read his Bible, and then he would leave it open for the rest of the family to see that, number one, he read his Bible, but also to take a look at what he read and underline. That influenced me as I was away from my girls and my family. When I'd read my Bible, I'd read something, and then when something stuck out, I'd highlight it, take a picture, and send a picture with a little commentary to several of my daughter's friends, to my wife, to my parents. So Bob really influenced me to get more into my word, and I think he's gonna love this sign, and I'm stoked to give it to him. So we're using our Bookman font for this sign. We're using 1 inch, 1.5 inch, and 2 inch. We're also using our The pattern, which this has been around since probably before I was born. And we're also gonna use our elk pattern. This is a larger version of our elk template. If you guys have something that we have on the website and you need it a little bit bigger, just shoot us an email, Ryan@makeawoodsign.com, Eric@makeawoodsign.com, or Vicky@makeawoodsign.com. And we can pretty much make it whatever size you want, within reason. So guys, I'll leave a link in the description below for everything we use today. Let's get started. So this is a beautiful chunk of walnut. However, it did present a few problems. First problem is it was a live edge piece and it had a round back to it. So I had to try to wedge it up to make sure it didn't rock and move too much while I was laying out and carving and working on it. I used these little 3/4 inch MDF blocks and it actually worked pretty good. The next thing is it wasn't a flat surface. So I took my disc sander with a 60 grit disc and I flattened it out a little bit and gave it kind of a fresh face. I didn't flatten it out all the way, and I probably should have. So when you're laying out something on a live edge sign, there's a lot of eyeballing that you have to do. The first thing you got to do is get your biggest line done, and you got to try to eyeball that. There's really no way to measure off of the top or bottom, or even the sides on this case, because they weren't straight. So once the top line was done, then I measured 2 inches down for my second line, and then 2 inches down from that for my third line. And that's going to vary depending on what size letters and numbers you're using. The other kind of issue is with that elk, I was trying to get it as balanced as possible. So I had the pattern on the left hand side, or your guys is right, and then the elk on the other side. And this is the best place I found for that size of a template. If it was a smaller one, then I could have put it pretty much anywhere, but I wanted it a little bit bigger to kind of show up a little bit more. So this is the layout I came out with, and at first I wasn't too sure about it, but I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. Remember guys, if you have an outset line, make sure you give a little bit more space around there for your bubble and for your cleanup, because that's going to take up a lot more space than an inset line. Always remember to draw in your punctuation, whether it's apostrophes or commas, before you start carving, otherwise you probably will forget to carve them. So guys, we don't have any sponsors. Our entire business is funded by selling supplies to you guys that want to make signs. We've got base plates, router bits, hundreds of stencils and templates. So if you do us a favor, head on over to the website, makeawoodsign.com. Go through it, check it out, and if you want to start carving signs, that's your #1 resource to get the stuff you need. The first bit I'm using for this sign is the profile bit at 3/16 of an inch deep. Now this is the bit you want to use for all of your outset carving. So when you're doing outset carving, you're essentially carving around the letter because that's going to stick up and you're going to have everything cut down around it. Now if you've never carved walnut before, it's a hard wood, so it is really kind of tough on the bits, but it's really consistent. So you don't have a lot of hard spots than soft spots, and that's really what makes it difficult to hold a line in certain boards. I really enjoy carving walnut because it looks great. I love the smell of the sawdust, and it's pretty simple to carve, but you need to make sure that your bits are clean and that they're sharp. When you leave your bits dirty, like let's say you did maybe 2 or 3 signs and then you're going to go into doing a walnut sign or really any hardwood, leaving your bits dirty will create a lot more heat, which creates friction, which is like a freaking death call for your router bits. It's really going to beat them up faster. So you want to make sure that your bits are as clean as you can, and we have several different videos on that. But just a little brass wire brush will clean them up really well, and you'll be amazed at not only how much better they carve, but how much longer they last before you have to sharpen them. So in case you guys don't know, we will sharpen any bits you get from us, except for the spiral upcut bits. Those ones we cannot sharpen, we don't have the tooling for it, but any of the other ones we will. So if you're a premium or executive member, we'll sharpen your bits for free. You just got to ship them to us. And even if you're not, we'll still sharpen them, but we charge per bit. So some people do them themselves, but you need a diamond wheel because these are full carbide bits and a lot of practice. One thing you want to do, especially if you're carving hardwoods or a wood that maybe you haven't carved before, you want to start at a shallower depth. So like 3/16 right here is really good for doing the tips of the antlers on the elk and also down around the feet. When you're carving something that's really hard, the deeper you go, the more drag you're going to have on the router. So it makes it quite a bit harder to hold a line. That's one of the reasons I did this in 2 steps. We do that usually anyway, but it's especially important on hardwoods. Now that I have the initial outline done of all of my outset letters and the elk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that same profile bit down to 1/4 inch deep and go around everything again. Now there's certain letters like the M's and the N's where there's going to be little spots in between the lines that you really can't get a 90-degree bit in there to get your background. With the bit at 1/4 inch deep, once I go around everything, I'm going to go in there and take all of that out. Remember that your background is going to be all taken out of there, and if it's too thin of an area to get the 90-degree bit in, you want to use the profile, or even sometimes I'll use the 60 to go in there and take it all out, because it's really easy, especially if you're like not paying attention, maybe you got some music on. It's easy to get in there with the 90-degree bit and start hitting letters and hitting areas that you want to be nice and straight. So drop that bit and go in and take out everything you need to. Now that I've got all the outline done and I went around it again deeper at 1/4 inch, I'm going to use my 90-degree bit at 3/16 inch deep, and I'm going to go in and do all my background. Now this bubble around the pattern, you don't have to follow it. I do because it's already there, it's nice and easy, and I think it looks really good. But you can make whatever sort of cloud or square or oval, whatever you want. It's just all up to you. It just kind of depends on what you think looks good. Something to keep in mind when you're using the 90-degree bit, and honestly even the 60-degree bit, is that you can't go deeper than the flutes. So if your flutes are 3/16 inch long and you go 1/4 inch deep, then you're going to get a lot of burring and a lot of burning. So you really want to stay as deep as you can without going past those flutes. Now for this background, all I'm doing is going in kind of random circles. There's a ton of different stuff you can do. In fact, some of you guys out there that have sent in your pictures to like a Sign Carvers of the Day, you come up with some super creative different backgrounds. This is kind of a standard that we do, but really, again, it's totally up to you, whatever you want to do. You can even go in to do a flat background with a spiral upcut bit if you like. That's not something we really like to do. I'm not a huge fan of that look, but there is some stuff that calls for that that looks really cool. Now the last step I got to do is all my inset lettering. I'm going to do that with my 60-degree bit at 3/16 inch deep. Again, the punctuation is always first. At least for me it is, because I know I'll forget it if I don't do that first. Now there's a lot of different ways you can do your inset letters. My grandpa used to do all his inset stuff with a profile bit. We like using the 60-degree bit. mainly because it gives a bit of a wider cut and it's a lot faster. However, it is more difficult to stay inside those lines, and it's a little bit more difficult to get your cut straight. So it takes a little bit of practice. I know for me, this was the hardest thing to learn, is small inset letters, simply because there's a lot of areas where the bit is going to cut wider than the letter. So it's not really like you're staying inside those lines all the way around. There's kind of some different variables where you have to make judgment calls. And for me, I like to have a structure. I like to have it like, okay, stay in these lines and you're good to go. But small inset letters cutting with the 60-degree bit aren't quite like that. You add a little bit here, you take a little out of there, you kind of split the difference. So it takes a little bit more practice to do it, but when you get it done right, I think it looks really good because you have a nice deep cut and they really show up on that sign well. You want to make sure once your carving is done, before you spray the whole thing black, that you use a stiff bristle brush and brush the crap out of it to get anything loose out of there that's going to come out after you sand it and blow it off. Now you can see where I'm spraying my primer here. I kind of made a mistake. I was spraying way too close to this sign and I ended up overspraying this sign quite a bit. It wasn't that big a deal because this is walnut, there was no bleeding, it's a hardwood. But on pine, this would have destroyed the sign. So I kind of got to watch what I'm doing there. Once the primer dried, which took just a few minutes, then I used an 80 grit disc on my disc sander to get all that black off. And I went back with a random orbital with a 120 disc to give it a smooth finish and get it prepped for that clear coat. Once I get it all sanded and blown off, I saw a few high spots, so these are easy to touch up. I just used a Sharpie and kind of marked those and made them black, and after you put the clear on them, you'll never be able to even tell they're there. Now we used our Rust-Oleum clear on this, and I only showed one coat, but we ended up putting right around 10 or 12 coats on it, and it gave it just a beautiful deep shine, and man, I love this thing. And Bob really liked it too. So there it is, you guys. I really am happy with how this came out. It was pretty tough because it wasn't 100% flat. That base plate was always kind of moving around on me. The back was rounded, so even blocking it up, there was times where it would rock. It was definitely a challenge, but I think Bob's really gonna like this. So as always, guys, we will leave links in the description for everything we used today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.